It is time for my next historical video, or rather a history-based video, where knights like the Praetorian Guard. Alright, so I heard a claim, or rather few separate claims, that medieval knights were like the Roman Praetorian Guard. This was in a combination of memes on Reddit, as well as some people in shorts and YouTubes, claiming that knights were, well, like the Praetorian Guard. So, for context, what were the Praetorian Guard? They were the elite bodyguards of certain Roman emperors, during, all the way up to Constantine, who had them, destroyed and abolished. And they were well known for killing emperors that they served, to the point where sometimes they'd auction off the throne to the next guy. Now, the lowest, and I've seen multiple estimates for how many emperors the Praetorian Guard killed. The lowest estimates I've seen was 13, with the highest being 15. It's far lower if you count them doing it directly, and by that I mean doing it just on their own and not because someone else, like the next emperor, told them to do it. But still, it's between 13 and 15. Now, during the Praetorian Guard's existence, there were about 66 emperors. I say about because Roman politics gets complicated, and there are plenty of guys who were sort of pretenders to the throne. But in any case, this means that roughly 20 to 22% of Roman emperors during the time the Praetorian Guard were active were killed by the Praetorian Guard. And my job is to figure out if these claims about knights being like the Praetorian Guard are true. Now, methodology. So, I'm going to look at how every medieval king, based on how the country defines the Middle Ages, or based on the fall of Byzantium if it don't have anything for the country itself, in England, Castile, Aragon, and France, as well as how every Holy Roman Emperor died. And I will count how many were killed by their personal knights, either directly or through inaction, and divide it by I wrote this at the start, divided by nationality, as well as coming up with an overall total. That got dropped as I finished this, and you'll find out why. Now, I am limiting it to kings of those specific nations, and I am limiting it to kings and the Holy Roman Emperor, specifically because those are the most analogous to Roman emperors, and also because a bunch of the memes and claims that I saw claim that knights would kill and dethrone kings and stuff like that all the time, so the accusation is specifically related to kings. But another reason why is because if I decide to make this about various feudal lords who aren't kings, because of how many of those lords there are, I am never finishing this video. And I am limiting it to Castile, Aragon, France, and Germany, because while there were obviously knights in a lot of other kingdoms, those are some of the most important in medieval Europe, and also some of the most iconic, and I'd never finish the video if I included this everywhere knights existed. This already took me multiple days to make. Now, continued restrictions. I am limiting it to personal knights of kings, as in not knights of other kings, or knights, because obviously, if you're a knight who's serving, say, the King of France, you have no duty to be loyal to the King of Spain unless he's also the King of France. I am also not counting the knights of lords who serve the king, because the reality of feudalism is that most people were more loyal to their individual lord than they were to their king. And that, if knights were like that too, then that just makes them like everyone else, not particularly treacherous. I am also doing things by country as well, because the knights of one place being treacherous should be differentiated from the knights of another place being loyal. Let's say the knights of Spain were unusually loyal, but the knights of France were unusually treacherous. That is something that should be noted. Now, I am only counting people who either started off as knights by inheritance or were knighted, not higher nobility unless they were a knight first. Because while there were certain periods of human history where every noble in certain medieval countries were considered knights, the people aren't talking about a duke or a count who happens to be a knight because they're a noble. They're talking about the lowest ranks of nobility. So only knights who either started off at that rank or stayed at that rank their entire life or got knighted after being a commoner or something are going to be counted. I am also not going to go into why any of these killings happened, if any show up. The Praetorian Guards killed some emperors who deserved it, but those aren't excluded from examples of their treachery. Now, further restrictions and difficulties will be mentioned in their sections. First off, the Kingdom of England, probably the most simple and straightforward one. We're going from William I, because he's the guy who brought knights to England, through Richard III, because like the English ranked the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Tudor period with the death of Richard III. So, William I either died of a disease or when his saddle's pommel injured him when he was riding his horse, possibly injuring him due to his weight. William II died of a hunting accident that might have not been an accident. We don't know for sure. He was killed by a guy called Walter Tyrrell, according to William of Malmesbury, but Walter Tyrrell was not one of his knights. But if this was an assassination, it's possible his knights let it happen. It's also possible they weren't informed by the assassins because they didn't want the knights protecting him. So I'm counting it as one half just to be as generous as possible. Henry I died of a disease, Stephen died of a disease. Henry II died of an illness he got while fighting his son and the King of France. Richard I was a prince by birth, so it doesn't count. That being said, I should like to note that Richard I never used the title of prince. Princes at the time went by lord. Richard I died when he was shot by a crossbow during a siege. Richard was putting away a rebellion by a viscount who was born to that position. So, not knight treachery in this case. And unless you think knights are faster than crossbow bolts, which I can assure you they aren't, there wasn't really anything his knights could have done to protect them. John died of dysentery he caught fighting his barons and the French. At least some of John's personal knights betrayed him while others stayed loyal. I couldn't find much for exact numbers because the sources focus more on the barons, but it's difficult to say. To be generous, I'll give it another one half. Henry III died of a disease. Edward I died of dysentery while going to fight the Scots. This was like a Scottish rebellion that after he basically took over Scotland, so not that. Edward II was usurped by his wife and her boyfriend and assassinated. No one, including his knights, tried to stop them, so yes, this is legitimately a king dying as a result of his knights' inaction, and note that I'm counting direct betrayals as well as betrayals by inaction. Now, Edward III died of a disease. Richard II was usurped by his cousin and starved to death in captivity. His knights were with him in Ireland when he was usurped, like he brought most of them with them, and there wasn't really anything they could have done to stop it, and he just sort of gave up when like this usurper, the next guy, got enough power. Now next up, Henry IV died of a disease, Henry V, disease. Henry VI was imprisoned after his side lost the War of the Roses, or rather lost the Battle of the War of the Roses, and was then assassinated. His knights were not involved in the assassination, as far as I know at least. Edward IV died of a disease. Edward V was imprisoned in a tower and killed. We don't know who did it at all. There are suspects for who ordered it. Like, we suspect that might have been Richard III, he's the most common, but some people also suspect Henry Tudor, or aka Henry VII, or Henry VII's wife. Sorry, his mother, I mean, not his wife. God. But there are none for who actually carried out the deed. That being said, it's unlikely it was one of his knights, because Richard III already had his household knights arrested. So, kind of disposed. Now, Richard III died in battle after leading a failed cavalry charge that got surrounded. You could say his knights failed to protect him, but it wasn't really their fault at that point. So that's the final count for England. The kings, 18 of them, killed by their own knights too. That's 11%. Reminder, between 20 and 22% of Roman emperors who had the Praetorian Guard were killed by it. Now, the Kingdom of Aragon. So I chose Aragon and Castile because they would end up becoming the Kingdom of Spain in the future, though like after the Middle Ages, but still they'd end up unifying and becoming Spain. So then now we have a wide variety of selections. But anyway, it became an independent kingdom in the 1000s under Ramiro I. we'll be going from him to Ferdinand II of Aragon, because after his death they were basically unified. And unified by his marriage to Isabella, specifically. Also note that there were definitely knights in the 1000. So, Ramiro I died in battle. Sancho Ramirez was shot by an arrow in battle. Not much, yeah. Peter I, from what I could tell in my research, we know where he died, but not how he died. I find this a bit suspicious, but it's also possible the records of his death were lost to time, or that he died of some weird disease that they couldn't figure out with their medical technology. So to be fair, I'm just not going to count him one way or another. Now, Alfonso the Battler died after a horrendous defeat by the Almoravids. The exact method is unknown, but he likely died of his wounds. I find it unlikely that his knights were the cause of his death. There isn't really any evidence to say they were, more so that he just lost a battle and was wounded and died. Ramiro II, he quit or retired being king to become a monk, then he died peacefully in a monastery. Petronilla, the first ruling queen on this list. She abdicated in favor of her son, ruled as a regent because she was a child, and died of natural causes. Yeah, kings and queens are going to be here for the Spain section. Alfonso II, as far as I could tell, he died of natural causes, though with the last two, his exact cause of death was not recorded. And eventually, and I'm going to get to it later, but eventually I just decided that because I ended up dropping so many kings in the Spain section because their exact cause of death not recorded, I'm not counting them, I decided to make a rule that if a king is in his late 50s or older, I'm going to assume he died of natural causes, and you're going to see why. I guess if his actual death isn't recorded, you're going to see why. Yeah, so, Peter II died in battle fighting the French, likely early in the clash. He may have been killed by a knight, but not a Spanish knight. Or rather, not a knight of Aragon. Now, James I died of a disease. Peter III died of an unknown cause, not counting him. Alfonso III died of a sudden fever. James II died of natural causes, as far as I could tell. Alfonso IV, yeah, I got a bit frustrated at this point, because it was difficult to find out how many of them died, and I'm pretty sure a bunch of them were just someone copying and pasting Wikipedia. Now, Peter IV, 67, here's where I established the precedent. I am just going to assume he died of old age, just because I don't want to have to not count any more kings, though I still end up having to not, count a few. But anyway, John I fell off his horse and died. Thank you, John, for dying in a memorable enough way that Spanish historians wrote your cause of death down. Yeah, he was pretty frustrated at this point. Martin laughed himself to death. Literally, that's how he died. Ferdinand I died of kidney stones. Alfonso V was in his 60s and traveling. I will assume natural causes, because fuck, it's hard to find out those guys died. John II died of natural causes. Ferdinand II, the last king of Aragon, died of dropsy and a weakening heart. There isn't really much knights can do about that. Even their doctors couldn't. So, yeah, I couldn't find any Aragon kings that were killed by their own knights. So, not bothering with the percentage since it's 0%. So let's move on to the Castile. So, Castile became an independent kingdom under Sancho II. It had counts before he was their first king, and I'm going from him to Isabella I. So, Sancho II was assassinated by an enemy noble pretending to be a deserter, not a knight. Alfonso VI, he died, not counting him. Urraca died in childbirth. Not much knights can do about that either. I mean, you could do a C-section in modern times, but first off, that'd be very difficult to do with a sword. And next, C-sections at the time were done on women who already died in childbirth. They weren't done on living women because the procedure would have been fatal. Alfonso VII, no information. Sancho III, as far as I can tell, it's unknown how he died. Alfonso VIII, late 50s, assuming natural causes. Henry I was hit by a tower tile and died from his wounds. As far as I could tell, this was an accident, and even if it wasn't, he wasn't killed by a knight. Berengaria had no recorded cause of her death, was in her 60s, so assuming natural causes. Ferdinand III died of dropsy. Alfonso X, in 60s, the cause of death couldn't find it, so I'm assuming died of old age. Sancho IV died of an illness. Ferdinand IV, we don't know how exactly he died, and there are multiple written accounts of his death. Some are more believable than others. The most fair thing, I think, is to just not count him. Like, some of them are, like, some of the accounts of his death are fairly grounded, others are outright supernatural. Alfonso XI died of the bubonic plague. Peter was killed by his half-brother due to the machinations of Bertrand du Guesclin, who was a French knight in Spain because it's like resolved this dynastic dispute on behalf of the King of France. So you could say getting him killed by his half-brother was a dick move, but it wasn't Bertrand betraying his king. This was Bertrand being loyal to his king, and that's basically screwing over another king to get what he thought would be the best outcome for his homeland, since Bertrand wasn't one of Peter's knights. Henry II couldn't find a cause, not counting. John I fell off his horse and died. Henry III died from ill health, something he had throughout his life. John II couldn't find out how he died, not counting him. Henry IV died of a disease. Isabella I died of uterine cancer. So, once again, 0 kings killed, or queens too, directly or indirectly by their own knights. I'm going to move on to France, but first some issues. So, France was split into 3 under Charlemagne's grandson: East Francia, West Francia, and Middle Francia. I'm going to count East Francia as the Holy Roman Empire, West Francia as France, and ignore Middle Francia since it basically got eaten by the other Francias. Another issue is that France and Germany are probably the oldest of these kingdoms that actually had knights. Now, we don't know exactly when the first knights were around. There isn't someone we can point to and say, oh, this guy was the first knight. But the earliest time period I've seen was the 800s. Now, Charlemagne was the king of France and Germany, but the Holy Roman Emperor, during the 800s. Well, rather, the late 700s through early 800s. He died in, like, 814 or something, and his son, Louis the Pious, ruled fully in the 800s. So we're starting with Louis the Pious, ending with whoever was king in 1450. Simply because I want to make sure we're not distorting the numbers too much for if any knights who killed their king directly or indirectly show up. So, Louis the Pious died of a disease. Charles the Bald, like Dug, was not actually bald. He died of an illness. Don't know why they called him the Bald, but I think it might be like calling a tall guy tiny. Louis the Stammerer died of an illness. Louis III died hitting his head on a beam while chasing a woman to try to rape her. I do not feel sorry for him. Carloman II accidentally was stabbed in his leg while hunting a servant. The records say he was stabbed by his servant, not a knight. He was accidentally stabbed in the leg while hunting a boar. The records say he was stabbed by his servant, but it doesn't say if his servant was a knight or not, and I think that if he was a knight, they would have mentioned it. So if it was a knight, I give it a 1/2 because there's a chance it wasn't really an accident, but it wasn't, so Charles the Fat was deposed, didn't really do much to stop it, and he died of an illness. Odo of France couldn't find much information, was in 40s, so not counting. Charles the Simple was deposed and died in prison. His cause of death wasn't written, so I'm not counting him. Couldn't find much information on the battle that was on his disposition either. So basically, I have no idea if his knights betrayed him or not. And it could just be that he died of a disease or something. Anyway, Robert I died in the aforementioned battle that deposed Charles the Simple. His side won in the end, so he doubt he died because he was betrayed, but just in case, I won't count him. So Rudolph died of an illness. Louis IV, there are different accounts. He either fell from his horse and died of wounds from it, or died from tuberculosis. Either way, it wasn't his knight's fault. There isn't really much a knight can do about tuberculosis. Even a hospitaller probably couldn't do much in that period. Lothar died of a fever. Louis V died from falling off his horse while hunting. Hugh Capet died of smallpox or some other natural cause. I found multiple variations, but they all agreed he died of some disease. Robert II died of a fever. Henry I couldn't find any information on how he died, and all the articles on Henry I that I found about death, I'm pretty sure were about England's Henry I, so I'm not counting him. Philip I kidnapped a woman and was so obsessed with her that he didn't do anything other than, well, presumably rape her, and then he let himself go as a result and died. I do not feel sorry for him. Louis VI died of dysentery. Louis VII died of a disease. Philip II died of a fever. Louis VIII died of dysentery. Louis IX died of dysentery as well. Philip III died of dysentery. It was a very common disease, especially on the battlefield, or rather going to it. Philip IV died of a stroke. Louis X died after drinking too much wine after intense physical activity, I think tennis in this case. John I was a child who died due to high infant mortality rates. Philip V was sick with multiple diseases and died. Charles IV died of an illness. Philip VI, I couldn't find the method of death, but it's most likely natural causes from what I could tell, and he was in his late 50s at the time, so counting it as natural causes. John II died of a disease while in English captivity after willingly going in because his son escaped captivity. You could say it was fairly chivalrous of him, but not really that smart, and it wasn't really his knight's fault, because what the fuck are they going to do to stop their king if he decides he wants to go and deliver himself to the enemy? Now, Charles V died of an abscess that might have been caused by another king poisoning him. It's possible it was poison, but it was more likely due to a disease, and even if it was poison, there's no evidence one of his knights delivered it to him. Charles VI, couldn't find what he died of, so not counting. Charles VII, final king of France, died of an infection. So, yeah, no French kings died as a result of their own knights betraying them, at least not of the kings that I could find the causes of death from in the Middle Ages. Oh, and also, I should note that I was restricting it to the Middle Ages because, the situation of knights in the 1500s when they were becoming obsolete was very different than medieval knights. Now, Germany, starting with Charlemagne's son and ending with the Holy Roman Emperor in 1450. Louis the Pious died of disease. Louis the German died of a stroke. Charles the Fat again, once again, died of an illness. Arnulf of Carthagia died of an illness. Louis the Child, couldn't find the exact cause of death, so not counting. Conrad I died of wounds sustained fighting a rebellious duke. This duke's father was a Margrave, so he doesn't start off to count as a knight, as stated as a start, so not caused by a knight betraying him. Henry the Fowler died of a stroke. Otto the Great died of a fever. Otto II died of malaria. Oh, and also, you notice I'm counting an emperors here. I'm doing this because Otto the Great is the guy who built the Holy Roman Empire into what most people think of it as. There were a few other steps, but he's the one who really made it after the Carolingians fucked things up. Anyway, Otto II died of malaria. Otto III died of a disease which might have also been malaria. Henry II died of a urinary infection. Conrad II died of an illness. Henry III either died of a fever or tuberculosis. I couldn't find a consistent cause, but he definitely died of some illness. Henry IV died of an illness after being deposed by his own son, who is the next guy on this list. Henry V also died of a disease. Lothar III couldn't find cause of death, so not counting. Frederick Barbarossa got impatient when crossing a bridge, tried to take a shortcut, then he fell into a river in his armor and drowned. So yeah, his death was pretty much entirely his own fault. Henry VI died of malaria, and in case you're wondering how all these German kings died of malaria, remember that a lot of them had estates in southern Europe. Now, Otto IV died of an illness. Frederick II, who I was very seriously tempted more than any other king on this list to put GigaChat in as an image of him, though I was tempted with a few others. He knew more about birds than scientists up to very recently. He led the Sixth Crusade, which, unlike what some people would have you think, actually accomplished a lot. It took Jerusalem without killing anyone. And this also embarrassed the Pope, since Frederick II was excommunicated and he took Jerusalem for Christendom. Anyway, he died of dysentery. Henry VII died of an illness. Louis IV had a stroke. Charles IV couldn't find his exact cause, 60s, so assuming natural causes. Same thing with Sigismund. Now, Frederick III, last guy on the list, technically emperor from 1452, but close enough, since it looks like there was a skip. I've found multiple accounts, and it's possible that multiple things happened, but he either died of leg amputation or of a disease he caught. So, yeah, none of them were killed by their own knights betraying them. So, out of all the kings I've looked at with definitive causes of death, only one for sure, that being Edward II, died as a result of two of his kings as a result of his knights betraying him. two others, those being King John and William II, are debatable, and they're all kings of England. So, was something up with English knights, or did England just have really bad luck with kings anyway? I'm not going to bother calculating the percentages. I didn't expect them to be as high as the Praetorian Guard, like at 20%. But I also didn't expect them to be this low. I thought that at least one king from everywhere would be killed by his own knights, but it really seemed to just be England of the places that I looked at. And even then, it was very few, like half as much as by percentage as the emperors. So the Knights of England, France, the HRE, Castile, and Aragon were not like the Praetorian Guard, at least when it came to their ruler and kings. The knights of some other kingdoms I didn't look at might have been, but the knights of the aforementioned kingdoms shouldn't be judged by the actions of the others. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.